So I thank Anna for her clever titles for us. So we're going to call it Bean It to Win It, Nutrition Swaps. So I want you all to interact with us a little bit. So go to the chat box. So it looks like a caption. And if you, your family, or clients do not use a lot of beans in their menus or recipes, what are the reasons? So you can go to the chat and start giving some of that background, and I'll go back and look at your answers a little later. But I'm going to keep on moving while you're doing your homework here. So this morning, in about 20 minutes, I'll be talking about some of the recommendations, the role of beans in special diets, and how to incorporate beans throughout your menu. So first of all, where do beans fit? And Juan would be able to cover this better than I, being he is in plant science, but people are often confused about the terms legumes, pulses, beans, and so on. So in the big category of legumes, we have soybeans, peanuts, pulses, fresh peas, and fresh beans. And then we can go down to the lower rung, and that is where we have dry beans, and they're cousins with dry peas, chickpeas, and lentils. So a dry bean is a pulse, even though they're in separate commodity groups, but they're all in the same big family. So what are the recommendations? So you can find your age and gender on the screen. You can see for people from 19 to 50, about 2.5 cups for women, 2 cups a little later. You can keep eating 2.5 cups. That's all great. For men, 3 cups of vegetables, not necessarily beans, but I'll show you how it all fits together. So men, 3 cups, 3 cups for 19 to 50-year-olds, and 2.5 for 51 plus. So unfortunately, many people do not meet these recommendations. Just 10% of adults and 2% of children meet the daily recommendations for vegetables and fruits. And I just found those statistics from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And the unique thing about beans and pulses in general is that they can count as either a vegetable or as a protein. And we also know that older adults in particular do not eat enough protein. And we also know that protein should be incorporated throughout the day, not just a big meal at supper time. We should really try to get our protein, including beans and animal proteins, whatever you like, throughout the day, including at breakfast. So, as I said, beans are very unique. A cup of whole or mashed pulses of any type is equal to a cup of vegetables. And in the protein group, 1/4 of a cup of cooked pulses is equal to what they call an ounce equivalent of protein. So again, it's about 2.5 to 3 cups of vegetables and 5 to 6 ounce equivalents of protein per day are the recommendations from USDA's My Plate, which is based on the dietary guidelines for Americans. I am an omnivore. I eat all sorts of proteins, so I'm not denigrating animal proteins in any way. But I did want to show you a price comparison because a lot of people are especially cost conscious right now. Beans are lower in cost than many other proteins, so be sure to include them in the mix. 16-ounce can of beans as of last Thursday when I looked was only 86 cents, whereas extra lean beef was 7.87. Now they both have their advantages. So again, try to include both in the mix. Another advantage of beans is they do not contain major allergens. And they provide ample protein for people following vegan diets and just diets in general. So whether you eat an all vegetable diet or an omnivore diet, like many of us do, they're a great part of the whole mix for lots of reasons. So in special diets, some of you may know people who need to follow a gluten-free diet. They might have celiac disease or gluten intolerance of some sort. Beans have no gluten. So that is a definite advantage for beans. They also can be part of a diabetic diet, vegetarian diet, as I mentioned, and also weight management. They're very high in fiber, and that makes us feel full. So we might eat a little less. And they also have a lot of other advantages um, health-wise. So I'll just give you a little bit, and later I'm going to talk about more of the, I guess, nutritional chemistry of this in my second talk. But beans are high in both insoluble fiber, which helps our digestive system. It helps prevent constipation. They also contain soluble fiber, which can lower our blood cholesterol, so heart healthy. And beans have 2 to 3 times more fiber than the typical cereal grain. But they're a good combination, beans and rice or flour tortilla with beans inside. That makes a complete protein. So how can we encourage people to eat more beans? Well, start when they're young. Introduce beans to children when they're in preschool. Several years ago, I was on a project where we were working with our preschool, which is just below my office at NDSU. And we had the children grow all kinds of dry edible beans, and they learned how to cook them, and they tried them in various recipes and so on. They were really intrigued by beans. So when you start when children are young, any kind of vegetable, actually, because they aren't eating enough vegetables, starting at those really young ages is really important, but we can all learn to change our diets. Try to incorporate beans into lots of different dishes, different menu items, and as we'll learn in my second talk, really take the time. If you're starting with the dry bean, you have to soak and cook them properly. So more about that later. Don't hesitate to pick up canned beans. Often canned beans do contain more sodium, but they're extremely convenient. They're a little bit more expensive, although still inexpensive, when you buy them in the canned form. So any kind of bean is good bean. So let's talk about incorporating beans into the various parts of a menu. So you can try adding beans to chili. You can incorporate them into burgers or use it as a side dish for rice. So there's just a lot of different ways that you can incorporate beans into your menu. You could replace or even supplement the meat in enchiladas. That will add more fiber, more vitamins, and so on. So certainly don't hesitate to do that. So this is a question that I have gotten a lot over the years. When should you add different ingredients when you're making a bean-based dish? So if you have acidic ingredients such as lemon juice, vinegar, tomatoes, ketchup, molasses, or wine, you do want to add those after the beans have been cooked fully because they could interact with the cooking process. So the best thing, add them a little later. If you're starting with canned beans, it isn't going to make a big difference, but you could get beans that just won't soften. And interestingly, just on the hall for me is our food lab. And when we were creating a cookbook that is readily available to any of you, it's called Spillin' the Beans, we were testing all the recipes. And we found that our water was so hard at NDSU that the beans just wouldn't soften. So you can have that happen. And there are some things that you can do, adding a little salt, adding, I think, a little baking soda to make sure that your water isn't interacting with the softening power of the soaking and cooking process. How about onions? Add those anytime during the cooking process, but if you want a more pronounced onion flavor, The same holds true with herbs, as you see in the next tip. Add your onions during the last 30 minutes of cooking. So I just stole my own thunder. Herbs add toward the end of the cooking to retain flavor. And salt, add when the beans are almost tender. And again, this is to prevent that interaction of, any minerals that could be in your water or, the ingredients themselves from interacting with the softening of the beans when you start with dry beans and not canned. So how can you incorporate beans into side dishes and salads? Use them to add some extra color and texture and nutrition. Salads in general are great. I already told you that, we aren't eating enough vegetables collectively, probably across the world. Well, maybe not every country. Some countries are really good about eating beans and vegetables. We are not. Um, Incorporate baked beans as a side, for example, to a grilling menu. If you like pasta, make a pasta bean salad, or just top a tossed salad with some black beans or whatever beans you like. In soup, beans can be pureed to actually replace the cream or higher fat ingredients. So you still get that creamy texture, yet you are getting a lot of the fiber and some of the health benefits from beans by just incorporating those pureed beans. Well, I'm sure you're all familiar with hummus. A few years ago, nobody knew what hummus was. Hummus is typically made with chickpeas, which are garbanzo beans, but it also can be made with white beans. Hummus has become a big success story in the world of food and food processing because it is tasty, and we have a lot of recipes for hummus if you've never tried to make that. Bean dip is another dip or spread. We have lots of parties that come up in the springtime, so don't hesitate to put some bean dip on your menu. We've done some novel things at NDSU. Um, I know I've put out a number of recipes for black bean brownies. Uh, we've even made fudge with white beans. It's pretty tasty. And at NDSU, we had a student a couple years ago who pureed white beans, and she used it to replace about half of the fat in chocolate chip cookie recipes. We tried it in the student cafeterias, and the students loved it. So as it says on your screen, you can use pureed beans to replace up to half of the fat in recipes, and you still get a very good product. There are many specialty flours on the market. So if you know someone who has celiac disease, for example, you can readily buy gluten-free flours of different sorts, including bean flour, and that bean flour could be used to make homemade tortillas. So try some different foods and different ingredients. And I'm going to wrap up here with a little discussion on aquafaba. If you're not familiar with this, and I wasn't a few years ago, but it's really become kind of well known because aquafaba, which is the starchy liquid from cans of white beans or chickpeas, usually you want the white beans because if you take the starchy liquid from black beans, the liquid is not going to be white or clear. It's going to be colored. But you can use that as an egg substitute. And because of the current issue with eggs and diseases in chickens, many people are turning to some of the foods that they use in vegan diets. So like egg-free diets, for example, you can actually use this as a substitute. You can also use it to make macarons, meringues, mayonnaise, and you can use it as a binding ingredient. But I will be talking a little bit later about some of the issues that people may have with the less digestible carbohydrates in beans. So I'll have some solutions for you maybe. And if you wanted to use aquafaba, you simply whisk it or whip it. You can add a little cream of tartar or arrowroot powder as a stabilizer, and you can use it in different ways that maybe you didn't ever imagine. So that brine that you probably dump away might have some good use as well. So I'm going to quickly go through some of the resources we have. This whole webinar is kind of part of our Field to Fork series we've been doing for a number of years. So if you go to our website, click on resources, and then go to beans, you will find all kinds of things, including a whole cookbook called Spillin' the Beans, a handout called Now Serving Beans, another handout called All About Beans. I was having a hard time coming up with new titles here, but All About Beans has a lot of the research and more nutritional information. So for those of you on this seminar who are dietitians, you might especially be interested in some of that background research information. And then we have a series called Pinch and Pennies, and one of them talks about how to soak beans. And we have research summaries, and new videos are coming soon. We're going to be premiering them next week at a whole bean workshop. So I will thank you, and I will unshare because I know we have to stay on schedule. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Julie. Actually, we have like 3 minutes, so I'm not going to steal your 3 minutes. You had a ton of comments on the chat, but mostly you have only 2 questions that were like, how can I find that book? Spilling, I think it was Spilling the Beans, the one that you were mentioning.
Yes, please go. And we have resources on the Field to Fork site about anything you can grow in North Dakota that would be considered a specialty crop. But since we are such leading producers of beans, we did devote quite a lot of attention to beans. So check that out. We also have a handout about pressure cooking beans, and I see that's another comment. Of, how to make various things to speed up the cooking process. So please check out those resources, use them, they're there for you.